this, and you look all refreshed. Oh my God! August I was you. Anyway, really good to see you.
Yeah, good to be here, Kwame.
So today we have our concluding conversation. Care of the dying. We started 3 weeks ago, right?
Absolutely.
No, is it 2 weeks? Yeah, 2 weeks. So this is the
okay,
third week.
So this is the third week.
Yeah, this is the third week. Yeah. And it's been quite interesting and thought-provoking. Last week is what we looked at some of the things that goes into the care of a dying patient. We talked about the symptom controls and whatnot.
So we looked at the physical symptoms, bed sores, the nutritional aspects.
Anorexia.
Yes. So we looked at all of those and sleep problems and all of that, yes. And today we conclude. I want us to look at the psychological interventions.
Okay.
And then the social interventions as well as the ethical and legal considerations.
Okay.
So these are all the things that we put in terms of care because we're not able to roll back. So Kwame, I just shared with you a story earlier. We were discussing this before we came on air, and we see exactly how difficult and challenging it will be. And the story was about this young woman who developed lung cancer at 34 years. She was pregnant at the time. Unfortunately, the pregnancy was far advanced such that she was induced and she was able to have a baby. But she had what we call end-stage lung cancer, or cancer that had spread from her lungs. And she had just about a year from based on the statistics that are available for that type of cancer. So the question is, what do you do during this period? How do you live it out? What do the doctors do? I shared with you the kind of traumatizing treatments that she had to undertake, the number of CT scans that she has to undertake, and so on and so forth, the injections, the needles, the blood samples that are drawn. At the end of it all, then the person dies at the end of the day, and the question is, how do you live out this period? Should we do all that we can as healthcare practitioners, or should we focus on the other things? And those other things are what I'm going to conclude in today's discussion.
If you have any questions about the conversation we've had the past 2 weeks, you can send us a WhatsApp on 0244340437.
Right. So, Kwame, let's deal with the psychological interventions. So the first thing I want to talk about is depression. It is not surprising at all that when people are faced, or they know that they are living out the last months, the last weeks of their lives, then some of them get depressed or begin to show depressive symptoms. Some people may have regrets about the life that they have lived. And again, it's not surprising. It may be that you have some disease, so it forces you to really reflect. Sometimes it's just plain old age. You've hit that 80 mark, you've hit that 90 mark, and it is very natural for people to reflect on what life has been and what it could have been. And if you don't check all the boxes that you set out when you were in your 20s, then some people look back with regrets about how they've lived their lives. Some may be preoccupied with some legal matters that they have not been able to conclude. So maybe there's some land disputes, property disputes, workplace disputes that are still ongoing that they've not been able to settle. And they look at on that, and then they get very depressed. Some also may have financial problems that also may cause them, to become depressed. I know a man who actually planned out the last days of his life, even leaving money to be used for his funeral and burial. But then he developed a medical condition, and he had to fall on all of those savings. And by the time he had, used up all of those monies and eventually died, during the last weeks, he was very sad that he felt he was going to burden his family. So that's which he set out, not wanting to do. The last few months of his life, he had to fall back on those savings. So we try and provide psychological support and allow the patient to express their concerns and their feelings. And this is always the best and the simplest approach, because you really cannot change probably what is going to happen. You're not going to be able to wind the clock back at 80 years.
Yeah.
So that's what we try and do. But we try and let them express to us and their feelings, and then try and get a positive spin on it. And sometimes we share what other people's lives have been. These days, especially in the social media space, it's very easy to think that everybody's happy except you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because when you go onto social media, it's all one happy face. Everyone posting their happy
moments. Yeah.
You know, so it is very easy for you to also look back in your latter years and think that, okay, it wasn't much of a success. But when you're told about other people's lives as well, then you'd realize that, oh, well, I didn't do too badly.
Yeah.
So depression is one of the psychological things that we try and deal with. We help the patient and also their family actually to settle any unresolved matters. And for a lot of people, that's, in my experience, that's what matters to them. They solving family problems, unresolved family problems. And Kwame, it works like a soothing balm if they are able to do that before they pass on. The other thing I want to talk about, the psychological, and has to do with stress. I mean, the story that we shared before coming on air. If you are the husband of that individual who's developed lung cancer and you've just had a baby, dealing with your wife with that diagnosis. So how come my wife has lung cancer? She doesn't smoke. She's not around people who smoke. She's 34. You know, so how come she has that process of asking why, and actually physically taking care of the wife, the baby, and explaining things to others can be very, very stressful. So that whole dying process can be very stressful for the individual and also for friends and then the primary caregivers or the family. So a family member caring for the terminally ill person at home may also experience some physical and emotional stress. And the best way to treat the stress from our point of view is to provide information. Information about, or what we call the prognosis, and also any treatment plan that we are going to develop in caring for the individual, so that everybody knows what is going to happen. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, we tend to believe that people cannot take it, quote unquote, take it, so we hide information from them. Although ethically, if you look at the patient's charter, it doesn't allow us to do that. But a lot of people just think that, oh, the cancer, to me. No. So the best way is to provide information and also counseling to help them deal with the stress. As I mentioned last week, there are professionals who know how to handle these things, because you may be overwhelmed just with the physical care, bathing the person, feeding the person, turning the person to prevent bed sores. You may actually be overwhelmed because you probably have to still go to work. Even if you're working from home, you have to be, by your tablet and have maximum concentration. So stress is also another thing that we deal with, and usually the multidisciplinary approach is the way to go. The next point I want to talk about is grieving. Grief is the response to loss. So when people get very old, for example, they lose a lot of things. Some people just make friends, and I always caution people, their friends are their peers. Well, if you go along those lines, Charlie, when you are 80 or 70, you don't have any friends.
Okay. Yeah.
Most of your classmates are gone.
Yeah.
So you should have seniors as friends, peers as friends, and then you should have juniors as well as friends, so that you can mingle very, very well. So when people are growing or they become very elderly or they are hit with one disease or the other, they lose things. They grieve. So the loss of control, for example. So you are the Bushapeni, but now you are so incapacitated. You're not so strong anymore. So instead of traveling maybe for meetings, gathering the family around, you're not able to do that. So you have to delegate. And I mean, some power is sweet. So now when people are delegating, it's tough for them.
Yeah.
So that loss of control that you would otherwise have had if you were stronger fills people with grief. So grief is that response to something we think we've lost. So the loss of control, sometimes separation. So because of ill health, you have to go and stay with a relative, your son, your daughter, somewhere else. Maybe your usual abode is Mampong. Then now, because of ill health, you have to move to with your children at Takrade, who live in Takrade. And that may not be something that you are used to, because you go to Takrade and you don't know anybody there.
Yeah.
So that's a separation from what you are usually used to. The anticipated suffering is also something else that a lot of people will grieve about. Grief has different ways of manifesting. So there are physical aspects to grief, there are cognitive aspects to grief, there are behavioral aspects to grief, social, cultural, religious, and even philosophical dimensions to grief. So somebody will just lock themselves up. They will not go out anymore. This week, or was it last week, when our hero died? Was it
Chadwick, Black Panther.
A Black Panther.
Bozeman.
The guy who
Saturday.
made us all proud,
Yeah.
To be black for the first time, superhero,
Yeah.
black. All right. So, wasn't it heartwarming to know that even through it all, 4 years, he was making movies.
Yeah.
He was up and about, and nobody knew, that he was going through such, a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
So some people will grieve. They lock themselves up. You never see them. They disappear from the public space. They quit their work and all of that, because for them, it doesn't matter anymore. Who am I working? Because next year I will not be here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the grief sometimes will manifest. They're not going to eat anymore. Some people just refuse to use their brains. That's a cognitive way, for want of a better expression. Maybe you could work even being at home. You're a producer, so maybe you could do your scripts, whatever it is, locked away. But they just don't do anything anymore. Then the behavioral things, they're not going to take care of themselves anymore. So he says, I have lung cancer. Oh, look, then I'm going to smoke, I'm going to drink, I'm going to do all these things. I don't care anymore, because I'm going to die. I lived a healthy lifestyle, and then now look what got me. So grief has different ways it manifests, and we're on the lookout to pick out these manifestations of grief, and then we deal with it. It's not easy to deal with the grief, but we try and let them face and accept their diagnosis, and also take away that blame, that maybe this is happening because you did A, B, and C. And when people come to accepting what's going to happen, then they stop grieving. So these are the psychological areas or aspects of the care that we offer. Now let's look at the societal concerns or the social concerns. And I'm going to look at three main things. I'm looking at that. The legal and ethical concerns, I'll treat them separately. So the main thing is money. Unfortunately, the dying process, if it becomes very protracted, would require a lot of money. So how much does a CT scan or an MRI cost in our parts of the world? Close to 1,000 cedis. Imagine you're having to do an MRI scan repeatedly. It's going to deplete your resources. These chemotherapy agents, the cancer treatment agents, it costs a lot of money. Granted, young people can have these terminal conditions, but mostly it's the elderly who are retired. What kind of social interventions or healthcare programs do we have? So we have our national health insurance scheme in this country, but is it broad enough to take care of cancers and chronic conditions like chronic kidney disease and so on and so forth? So money then becomes a very important thing. But especially for the aged or the elderly, they worry that their children are spending too much money on them, and they'd rather keep it, for their grandchildren. So money can be tricky. We can solve this money problem by making sure that we as young people, when you are younger, you make sure that you take out either a healthcare plan with, there are quite a number of private health insurance companies. So you make sure that you are working and saving and having a medical insurance policy, because as for ill health, if you live long enough, we're all going to be confronted with it one way or the other. And then there's the out of the blue thing that happens even when you are young. So we should all make it a point to make sure that we've got a health insurance cover. Right, now let's look at the legal and ethical considerations as well to the care. I think in the beginning I talked about AMDs, Advanced Medical Directives. And Kwame, we said these are legal documents in which a person specifies what actions should be taken for their health if they are no longer able to make those decisions for themselves. So that's what an advanced medical directive is. Unfortunately, in Ghana, I don't think the legal framework is. There is a legal framework to support the use of advanced medical directives. But in my brief experience in the United States, for example, I know most, if not all, of the states accept or have the legal framework for advanced medical directives to be used. And it is very important that I will support the legal framework for it in this part of the country, because sometimes we do experience some conflict. When somebody is 88, 85, 90 years, where does it stop? When, should you ask for an MRI scan? Should you ask them to do a hip replacement surgery when they fall and have a fracture? You know, how many medicines should you pop at them? Sometimes I've seen people on 12 different medicines, you know, for their eye, their ears, their joints, and so on and so forth. So where does it end? Where does it stop? I think the individual should make a contribution to that, so that we know where it ends. Of course, we're not talking about euthanasia here, which is what sometimes they call the doctor-assisted killing. That's totally an illegality. But the point is, you want a tube to be put down your throat, you know, through your nose. If, for example, you fall into a coma, do you want to be put on a ventilator if your family can afford it for, say, 2 years or 3 years, and you are, you know, on a ventilator just to keep you breathing when you are deeply unconscious? You know, those are some of the things that will go into an advanced medical directive, or what we call the do not resuscitate orders. You know, so if you are 75 years old and you have very severe comorbid conditions, diabetes, hypertension, Parkinson's, dementia, and you have a stroke, do you want to be resuscitated or not? You know, what life would you get back to if you are revived? The quote-unquote vegetative state, where you become a vegetable, is very, very real. Do you want to be in that state? You know, so you can leave instructions regarding these things, so that the family members are clear what they can do and what they cannot do. Supportive against attempted therapeutic.
But isn't that preempting something that you're not sure of? Because if I am putting this ADM together to say, let's say, if I get into a vegetative state, knock me out.
No, not knock me out. Don't bother with a CT scan.
But okay, right.
Okay, don't bother putting a tube down my throat.
Yeah,
but to feed me.
But maybe that's gonna save you and get you back to, you know, good health.
Oh, absolutely. You know, so it's a maybe. So that's the point. The point is that, Kwame, you are making that decision now, and should we leave it in the hands of individuals to make that decision when they are healthy about what they anticipate might happen? So if you know, so you say if you are 80, a lot of 80-year-olds have loss of memory, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's.
But a lot don't.
Kwame, most do. You know, few don't. But the point is, if you are in that age group, and let's say you have a stroke, do you want to be revived? You see, and that is a question every individual gets to make a decision. If you don't want to fill an AMD, you don't want to. How about those who want to fill it? Should there be a legal framework to deal with it? So it's a conversation that we can encourage.
Is this a way of making the doctor's job easier?
I think there's always that conflict, and I've seen it a few times, where sometimes the doctors have been blamed for, quote-unquote, wasting the family's money. Go and do this test, go and do this test, go and do, but the doctor say, and I'm going to test we now say I've heard that a few times. And it puts us in a very tight position, because for us, the preservation of life is sacrosanct. So if you bring your father to the hospital, I cannot stand idle and say, what? I think he's had a stroke. I think, no. Go do a CT scan. Let me confirm that, yes, indeed, this loss of consciousness, this altered mental status is indeed a stroke. Then we can have a conversation. But that costs money. And sometimes, by the time they go and do the CT scan, come back with it the following day, the person's unconscious state or the coma state has declined, and then they die. Then the question is, but doctor, and then ambulance, you know, that is where I want us to. It's not it makes our job easier. We can always do our job.
So what would be ideal for you as a medical doctor?
Well, that's why I wish it was radio. I can share it as Yaw Osafo, you know, not a doctor. Because when it does happen to be knowing what I know and what I see, I think sometimes we as doctors, we've seen too much for us to be very Pessimistic. I have a very pessimistic view about this. I think sometimes look bleak. And I remember.
So then it means that we're still gonna have that conflict, and discussion will be unresolved.
Yes,
forever.
For most of the time, it is unresolved, except where you have that legal framework in a country that allows people to use AMDs. Then the conflict is no longer there; it's resolved.
Okay.
All right.
I think that maybe we should get an article that says Dr. Osafo is calling for, the AMDs in Ghana.
A conversation.
You want a conversation
around it? So I hope I am introducing that conversation. And everybody should ask themselves: would you write an AMD?
Mm-hmm.
Would you? And you are free to put in anything that you want to put in there, except to say that somebody should knock you off. That one is not allowed. That one is illegal. Okay. Then the last thing under the ethical considerations is cremation versus burial. That is also coming up a lot these days.
Okay.
I want to be cremated. Then the family members go like, share. No. No. We don't do that. It's not part of our culture. And things like that. So cremation versus burial. Again, this is where you as an individual can leave instructions regarding what happens, to you. So I've had a few people. Somebody was a Buddhist and wanted to be cremated, and
the family resisted.
Oh yes, they're not buying it.
Wow.
So culturally, because when you die, the body belongs to the family.
Yeah.
So cremation is not Ghanaian. It's not a Ghanaian thing. I use more to burial, but there are a few crematoriums around doing business. So it is getting in there, or it's coming into our society, and it is bringing some conflict in some families, and sometimes I've seen a few happen as well. So these are some of the ethical and legal considerations that I would want people to address their minds to.
What makes someone consider cremation over burial?
Belief systems. So we see it within people with certain belief systems, and then also some feel that environmentally it's better, to be cremated. So now there's a lot of this movement about saving the earth, and a lot of people believe that it's better, it's healthier, it's environmentally friendly, especially when you have Ebola, coronavirus, and things like that. Probably it's even better to go that way. So that's for some people, but culturally it's a no too for others, and it will be good to have all these conversations before it happens.
Yeah,
and
you have actually introduced interesting schools of thought, and the conversations are going to start in a lot of homes.
I hope.
I hope. About what happens when they are at that stage.
Yes.
When they are almost there.
Yeah.
What should happen?
Yes.
And I'm sure there will be another school of thought that will be challenging the cultural norms.
Yes.
Of, for example, burial versus cremation. I think one of these days we should have
will.
Yeah, will and no will.
So it's still there. It's difficult for a lot of people. I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine, and he says the cases that get protracted in court, most of the time they are always around wills. People wanting to challenge, or people haven't written a will. So if I ask people, do you have a will? They say, oh, doctor, I'm too young to write a will.
Yeah.
If something happens right now, people will fight. You'll be surprised that someone's coming to take your flat screen. Then that is a fight.
Yeah.
It's yours. It's your flat screen. What do you want to happen to it?
Yeah.
You've got to think. It's not about you admitting or promoting your mortality. But it's admitting one fact, one certainty. One day you're not going to be here. When is that one day? We all hope it's in the latter year. But even people are 70 and 75 and they're still not actively or engaging themselves in that type of conversation, because I think we fear death too much.
Well, I don't know what's going to happen to my headphones, but I think I'm going to write it down.
Yeah. Can you dash it to me?
Well, at least now I have one line filled. One line in my well is filled. Headphones to Dr. Osafo, ladies and gentlemen. Na in East Legon says, Lexis, I agree with the doctor on telling the family what exactly is happening, no matter how tough it is. My dad was battling with cancer, and I was given no explanation by the doctors until he was deteriorating. It was too late to come to terms with it and see things right. He passed soon after, and it broke my heart. That's from Na in East Legon.
She just nailed it.
Yeah.
Na just nailed it, and we need to talk about these things a lot more. People relish or would rather they are told.
Yeah.
Because then everybody gets to decide how they want to live it out and what type of relationship that they want to have with whoever family member is afflicted, and we shouldn't keep that from them.
Well, for the past 3 weeks, I can confidently call you a family life counselor now as well. So
What's my certificate?
What's your certificate? That time's going to give one. Yeah. I'm sure the next couple of days, people will call you and contact you for issues relating to the conversations that we are having here on air. So share with us your contact, Doc.
All right. So for those who want to get in touch, it's 0501 477 340 0501 477 340.
Lexis, my dad had prostate cancer for 7 years and died after being in coma for a week. The doctors tried to pass a tube through his nose, but he didn't survive. Abigail in Ridge. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Lexis, I'd like to be cremated so that I can have my ashes shared amongst my loved ones to add to a tree seedling. So when the tree grows, it's like a part of me is still there. From now in Sprintex. That's thoughtful. Thank you so much. We continue the conversation next week. We actually start a new conversation next week with the Drive Doctor, Dr. Yaw Osafo. He is the CEO of Medical Hospital in Medina Firestone behind the SG Bank and Mampong. Thank you, Doc.
You're welcome, Kwame.
Manuel has the latest update